Good morning. Welcome to this accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepherd, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Prophet, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. Welcome to members of the public. These meetings are designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work and performance of Hertfordshire Constabulary. We hold the meetings in a publicly accessible format for transparency, so we hope you find them interesting. The webcast is on watch only mode, so there's no ability for public questions, but we hope you find the conversation we'll have useful. On the agenda today, you've got 4 topics. Firstly, the Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan. Secondly, retail crime. Thirdly, some areas of reassurance for Hertfordshire communities. And fourthly, around violence fixated individuals, and we'll cover them in those in that order. So I'll start then with the Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan, which has been published by the Constabulary this month. Perhaps, Chief, if I can ask you firstly to give some context around the number of incidents of antisocial behaviour that the Constabulary dealt with over the last year and how they were dealt with before we get into the detail of the sort of forward-looking.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner. Good morning. The Constabulary recorded 21,470 incidents of antisocial behaviour last year. That's from the 1st of 2025 through to the end of March just gone. So these are incidents that don't meet the threshold for being a crime, but are unacceptable behaviour in our communities. The long-term trend in the Constabulary and indeed across the country is down. Now, some of that is to do with we are better and more accurate at now recording things that are genuinely crime. So 21,500 ASB incidents dealt with in a number of ways. So sometimes arrest, sometimes advice, sometimes presence, sometimes just dispersal. There's a number of specific powers the police have used over the last year in Hertfordshire. For example, on 16 occasions, a premises, that might be a pub, it might be a house, has been closed through a legal mechanism to stop antisocial behaviour happening. On 82 occasions, an individual was given a notice requiring them to stop behaving in the way they were, or they would be arrested. It's called a community protection notice. On 312 occasions, an individual was given a warning about their behaviour prior to the issue of a notice. On 14 occasions through the courts, we secured a criminal behaviour order to stop someone behaving in an antisocial manner. So you can see there's a whole range of different tactics that the Constabulary is using. Now, in addition to antisocial behaviour that isn't a crime, crime is by definition antisocial. And there are some crimes that the public often talk to me about overlapping with antisocial behaviour, things like damage in our communities, arson, hate crime, drug dealing, public disorder and weapons. The public understandably describe those things as antisocial because they are. And when we look at those categories of crime, what I'm pleased to say over the past 12 months is the Constabulary is solving more of them. We're catching more people for doing these things. So against that basket of crime that I've just said, last year the Constabulary solved 4,616 crimes of an antisocial nature, which was up from about 3,500 the year before, and a similar number. So we're tackling ASB, we're tackling antisocial elements of crime, and we're catching more people doing it.
Thank you very much for that reassurance. So the Constabulary has published its new Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan. What does that plan commit to, and what should the public expect from that plan in terms of the response going forward from the Constabulary on this issue?
Thank you. So the context here is every force in the country has published this month a plan on our websites for the public to say, this is how we are going to tackle antisocial behaviour with you and with our partners in your county, so in Hertfordshire. The Hertfordshire plan commits to being visible in our communities where antisocial behaviour is happening, targeting hotspot locations, whatever they might be, town centres, parks, dark streets, working incredibly closely with victims, people who are reporting antisocial behaviour, to make sure that we're helping them, whatever that might look like, advice, safeguarding and intervention, and perhaps most importantly, targeting the people doing it and holding them to account. So in the right place, supporting the right people and tackling the right people. And wrapped around that, really importantly, is a conversation that we must have as a Constabulary with our partners and with communities through the different engagement methods we've got to say, What does it look and feel like to you? Where do you see the problems? Okay, we've acted, telling the public we've done it, and the public can then see and feel and feedback on that. So there's that kind of two-way flow. So the plan over 15 or 20 pages talks about those things.
Thank you, and welcome, and obviously publish now for the public to have a look. How will you ensure that is kind of effectively owned locally? Because Antisocial Behaviour is something that happens in local neighbourhoods, and will look at times different in the centre of a big town compared to smaller communities. How will you ensure there is that kind of nuance and local ownership of that problem?
Well, we'll have a really clear tiered approach. So I've got a senior officer, Superintendent Ben Wright, who is responsible thematically for all things tackling antisocial behaviour working partnership across the county. Ben will chair a monthly scrutiny board looking at the collective action across Hertfordshire. And within each of our district policing areas, and in policing we divide the county into 6 areas, each of those local chief inspectors responsible for neighbourhood policing on that patch, with their partners, the council, probation, housing and others, will have direct requirements to update at force level, and then have their own local based partnership meetings where they're tackling local problems with specific issues. So I don't know if there are issues in East Herts, in Hertford, that plan should be picking that up, and the local chief inspector with the local partners will be tackling that. All of that will be measured and tracked in effectively a spreadsheet that sits behind the action plan. But the really, really important bit is police and the public and the partners working together to solve problems of antisocial behaviour, because the police have got a huge part to play, but sometimes so are their partners.
Absolutely, and that kind of multi-agency collaboration, particularly around working with local authorities, housing associations, and so on, is an incredibly important part of that. In terms of that kind of picture of consistency across the county, how will the Constabulary be working with partners to ensure that the public get a consistently good response across all of those different partnerships?
Thank you. Well, I mean, hopefully reassuring to say we haven't had to reinvent the wheel here. There's a really strong existing relationship between local policing teams and local partners, and we come together regularly and routinely in something called a community safety partnership. So through those local partnerships, antisocial behaviour is firmly on the agenda. So local chief inspectors will work with the community safety managers in the council, in probation, in housing, as I've said, to do that targeted local activity, be that supporting victims, being in the right places, or targeting offenders. And there's really good strategic buy-in from our senior partners. For example, later today, Superintendent Wright, Ben, who I told you about, is leading this, is briefing the deputy chief execs across Hertfordshire. So we get that really executive buy-in from across the councils and our colleagues, because everyone is committed to doing this in a shared approach. We've developed really close relationships in Hertfordshire with Historic England, which is a national organisation around protecting kind of parks and open spaces and heritage sites. So there's lots of work thinking about how we can work carefully with other people. The Special Constabulary, so our volunteer officers, will have a huge part to play in the visibility, the patrolling and the intervention that we do in this. So we're bringing in partners and volunteers and the specials into our activity. And we've got a really brilliant system called Safety Net, which is effectively a case management that we use really well in policing to capture an issue and the activity and the outcome. And we're bringing our partners hopefully so they can access that and put their information on that, so we get a single kind of lens on what's going on. So all of those things, I think, we've got a really solid partnership approach.
Thank you. And thinking about the plan as a whole, then what, from your perspective, will success look like? How will we know whether the plan is working and has the impact that we're hoping?
Yeah, a really important question. So I think there are some really key measures. Number one for me, where we see repeat occurrences at a place, or of a victim being victimised, or a person offending, I want to see less of that. If this is successful, we should see less repeat issues. I think we should see more intervention. So more of those types of things I said at the start, in terms of warnings, notices, arrests, closures, more activity happening that's preventative, better use of that shared system, safety net that I've just mentioned, more use of something called, and this is a really important part of this, the ASB case review, which is a victim's right where they are subject of repeat incidents. It's 3 or more in 6 months is the threshold. More, so a victim knows about their right to trigger that case review, and then we have that case review discussing with the victim, or what are your issues? Why is this keep happening to you? How can we better help you? We should be doing more of that and recording that and showing the outcomes of that. More communication, more good news, more confidence in the community that we're tackling this are the measures. Of course, the consequences, I hope we see less antisocial behaviour. That's the ultimate measure. Sometimes, though, when you get better at doing something, promote it, highlight what you're doing, you get more reporting. So I'm just a little bit reticent to say that if we see more antisocial behaviour reported, we haven't done great things. So I think that the other things are good indications of the right activity with an intent to drive down the level of antisocial behaviour happening.
Thank you. And I think that first point around reducing re-victimisation for me is a really important one, because we know that where antisocial behaviour can have some of its worst effects, it is that really pernicious, consistent occurrence that can make people's lives really, really challenging. So I think that first focus is incredibly important. Thank you. I think some good work being done across the county there, and look forward to seeing that plan take fruition. Thank you. We're going to move on then to retail crime, where there's been lots of work going on across Hertfordshire on this issue. It's a big topic nationally. It's a significant proportion of all crime nationally, and certainly in Hertfordshire, and lots of work in collaboration with retailers underway in Hertfordshire on this to do more about it. What's your current assessment, perhaps to start off with, of retail crime in Hertfordshire and the progress that's been made in recent months?
Thank you. Well, we are making progress. There is too much retail crime. But if we look at the last 6 months, so since October, we have really, as a constabulary, and we'll talk about some of this, worked incredibly hard with local retailers, with local town partnerships, and as a constabulary to be in high streets and around shops, nicking prolific offenders, to crack down on this. And I'm pleased to say since October we've seen a 17% reduction in the level of reported shop theft. Nevertheless, since October there's still been 2,621 recorded, but that is an appreciable reduction from the same 6 months the previous year. And we're solving a higher percentage of those reported thefts because of the focus on prolific offenders, capturing evidence, and working incredibly closely, and this is key, with individual retailers to work with their store security, to work with them how they capture their evidence, to crack down on the people who are committing this crime.
Thank you. And that is a considerable reduction, which is welcome. And of course, the context to that is actually over that same time frame, actually a lot of collective work to encourage improved reporting as well. So it's a reduction while also trying to make it easier for retailers to report. Doing something about those reports is obviously then a critical part of that, as you've alluded to. And there's been some work that the Constabulary's been doing with the Crown Prosecution Service to look at what then happens after an offender's identified. Can you talk me through that and what impact that's beginning to have?
Thank you. Well, yes, we, in January, I think it was the 1st of January actually this year, we agreed with the local Crown Prosecution Service a streamlined approach to summons effectively require a shoplifting offender to go straight to court without the need for an overly bureaucratic police investigation where there was compelling evidence of the criminality and there were no aggravating factors. So they weren't habitual or repeat or violent shoplifters. So relatively simple, but we need to get through it quickly. CPS have agreed that protocol, which means effectively we're getting more people to court more quickly, freeing officers to get back out on patrol more quickly, and having that suppressive effect. It's still early days. This has only been running now for 3.5 months. It had been picked up as best practice from other areas. So I think this will stand the test of time, and something I'm really positive about, and we will continue to work with our partners in CPS and of course the retail community to maximise its use of convicting more shoplifters more quickly.
Thank you. And I think, yes, simplifying that process, both for frontline officers, but also making sure people are held to account quicker is a really important part of that. So it's an interesting, innovative bit of work happening, which is good to see. We've touched a little bit around some of that partnership work with retailers. Lots going on in that space. How's the Constabulary been working to improve the confidence of retailers in reporting shop theft and associated offences?
Thank you. Well, I think first and foremost through our visibility to them and with them, and our conversations with them, and that's informal conversations just because officers are in high streets, walking through local shops and talking to the managers and talking to the staff and talking to security. That's point number one. Point number two is the fact that we are arresting more people, charging more people, convicting more people, and evidence would suggest reducing the amount of crime. That is building confidence. And we have a number of partnership forums, either in local towns. There are things called the business improvement districts, town centre partnerships, where we come together to tackle issues like shop theft, and it's being talked about in those circles. So store managers are hearing that through their forums, the councils are talking about it, the police are talking about it. So it's building confidence through our communications team in the police. We're promoting the successes we're having. So where we're catching and convicting high profile offenders, we might talk about some of that in a minute, we're making a splash about that, not to kind of sing our own praises, although I think it's right that I should celebrate the great work of my teams, and I'm happy to do so. But actually, I think if you're a would-be shop thief and you happen to be one of the few that can read, I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, and you see that Hertfordshire Constabulary is being really positive around this, you might think twice about doing it here. And that's the sort of message that we want to convey around our communication. I think that's really important. So a really strong partnership conversation and recognising the great work that's happening is building confidence.
Thank you. We know, touched on it a little bit there, we know that prolific offenders are a significant feature in shoplifting offences. How's the Constabulary approaching those very, very regular prolific shoplifters who do a disproportionate amount of shoplifting in our county?
Well, with a laser focus, I think is the answer that I expect of my team. So each local area, and really down to kind of town level, know who your prolific shoplifters are. So that top 5, top 10 approach, share that information, and we are with retailers so they can be doing their bit to spot, to alert us, to intervene, deter, whatever that might look like. And we're sharing that information across the constabulary, and more importantly across force boundaries and more broadly. We have a dedicated lead, another senior officer who really focuses this, so we can absolutely understand what's happening in Broxbourne as well as what's happening across the county, for example. And we use a new platform called Aurora, which is a digital platform where retailers can upload their CCTV and their information immediately, and we can see it. And the brilliant thing about this is, apart from making that really, really simple for retailers, which is important, is that there's some automation and intelligence behind that will search those images and go, oh, that image there is Andy Profit, but here are another 3 images that look like that, and that's probably Andy Profit. An offender, we can put all the offending potential to them, and it's driving us catching and convicting individuals for a high volume of offending they're doing, which gives a greater chance of conviction and a greater chance of a more substantive sentence ensuing at court. So all of those things, I think, are some reassurance, hopefully, that we are absolutely targeting prolific shoplifters.
Thank you. And I think the use of that technology is a really important part of that. And we've also got the pilot of the shop safe alert system in some of the smaller retailers launching as well, in terms of really trying to drive up that reporting.
Absolutely. And Commissioner, I should have said, sorry to butt back in, there's some practical examples very recently of this working. So a recent example where 4 individuals have been charged at court for a total of 37 offences across Hertfordshire and another 75 offences across a different 13 court areas. We've recovered nearly £73,000 of stolen goods. So organised shop theft, organised criminality. We're targeting that through this kind of focus on prolific offenders. Very recent example, I think it was this week, where another 2 members of an organised group have been charged with conspiracy to steal across a number of different locations, again across the country, with over £200,000 of goods. So we're targeting the individuals and we're targeting the organised criminality, and I think both of those things are important.
So thank you. The Constabulary is previously committed to not having any kind of minimum value of shoplifting that will be dealt with. A lot of focus sort of in the media sometimes around kind of so-called low value shoplifting. Does that remain the case, that the Constabulary will act proportionately, but will act on any value of shoplifting that's really reported, and how specifically does the Constabulary deal with that sort of so-called low level shoplifting?
That remains the case. It doesn't matter whether it's £1 or £1,000, we will investigate it proportionately. Clearly, you will do something different if someone's stolen something for the first time for £1, and if someone's a habitual shop thief and they've stolen lots of things. So we have a proportionate approach, but there is no minimum value of investigation.
That's reassuring, because it's something that comes up quite a lot, particularly with smaller retailers, where actually persistent low value shoplifting can be quite a big deal for them. So that's helpful to have that remaining the case. Thank you. Useful, thank you. And I think there's a really good work going on around retail crime in Hertfordshire, so it's good to get those updates. Thank you. I want to go on to some sort of reassurance questions, given sort of global events and the potential kind of impact that people in Hertfordshire might be feeling or worrying about as a result of that. Perhaps I could start off just by asking, how does the Constabulary work with local communities to provide reassurance and ease tensions when there are kind of global events that could cause friction in local communities?
Thank you, Commissioner. I mean, this is a hugely important area of prevention and reassurance for our neighbourhood policing teams and others, and indeed me and my senior leadership team. So I think that the first thing I'd say is we have a really strong network of community faith leaders and partners, and we talk to each other in Hertfordshire. You know, I have got dozens of contacts in my phone of people I can and do ring me when horrible events happen, usually somewhere else in the world, but leads to direct fear of communities in Hertfordshire. You know, we've got a really diverse community in Hertfordshire: Muslim communities, Hindu communities, Jewish communities, all sorts of communities who see things happening in the world, such as the tensions in the Middle East. They see attacks happening, as we recently saw last year in Manchester, as we very recently saw with ambulances being attacked in London, and it causes fear here. So we react to that straight away. We speak to people, we increase patrols, we get out and we visit high-risk sites, be those mosques, synagogues, whatever those areas might be. And we've got a number of partnership forums that help that happen. So there's a local resilience forum, which is a Hertfordshire-wide mechanism where people come together and talk about these kind of keeping community safe type issues. We had in recent months a number of interfaith and community leaders meetings where we brought people together in specific concerned communities to talk about how they were feeling. After the recent events, I wrote an open letter with the Lord Lieutenant and other community leaders to people across Hertfordshire, celebrating how strong we are as a community in Hertfordshire, recognising the tensions elsewhere in the world, but making sure that we stay together. And of course, the Constabulary is part of a recent initiative about Hearts Together, where we are celebrating the unity and the strength of diversity in the county through sport, through faith, through youth, because I think it's important to have a positive dialogue around some of the tensions that exist, as well as being alive to it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And to sort of dig into a couple of those things a bit more, you touched around the sort of concerns often are around sensitive religious sites in the county, for example. Comes up quite regularly whenever you talk to Muslim communities, Jewish communities, Hindu communities, for example, in the county. How how do local teams kind of factor those into patrol plans where appropriate to give people that reassurance that there is a presence when needed?
Yeah, I mean, they have their, as you've just said, patrol plans, engagement plans, where they will go to religious premises, Friday prayers, for example, with our Muslim community, to our synagogues when the Jewish communities are gathering. So it'll be part of the patrol plan for the neighbourhood, the neighbourhood teams. And we work as well with, a number of local and national partners who work with different communities to make sure that we're getting information that's happening nationally, and we're kind of using that to inform the conversations and the activity that we're taking locally. I mean, to put some context on some of that. So since the very recent horrible troubles that we've seen erupt in the Middle East around Iran, there have been over 500 reassurance visits to various premises across Hertfordshire by my neighbourhood teams. Now, some of those would have happened anyway, because that's just what we do. But some of that has been as a direct result of some of the tensions that we see play out on our televisions that cause concern in communities in Hertfordshire. So it's right, as a constabulary, we are alive to and responding to that.
Thank you. That's significant. Thank you. You touched on the recent incident in North London around the ambulances. We won't go into the detail of that, but in response to that, the Home Secretary talked about there being soaring anti-Semitism in the country. We've got the third largest Jewish community of any county nationally. What trends have we seen in Hertfordshire, and perhaps if I could ask you a bit more around what Constabulary's been doing in terms of playing its part around addressing anti-Semitism?
Thank you. So let me talk about some numbers now. The first numbers are where we have crimes reported against the Jewish community in Hertfordshire. You say there is a large Jewish community in the county. In the last 12 months, we've had 95 crimes reported. Some of those may be targeting people because they're Jewish. Some of those may be just crimes that happen to people who happen to be Jewish. 95. The previous 12 months, there were 83. So I don't belittle any one of those, but we aren't seeing a dramatic increase in reporting of crimes against the Jewish community, I think, is the first point to make. And of those crimes, 95 that I talked about in the last 12 months, 7 have already been solved with someone being held to account. 24 continue to be actively investigated with lines of inquiry, and 64 have been investigated with no suspect identified, but safeguarding, prevention and advice given to the victims. So we aren't seeing huge spikes, and that's been a relatively stable trend over a number of years in Hertfordshire. Not complacent. I recognise the risk of underreporting, and we work really hard with our communities, Jewish communities and all communities, so you must report things to us, because if we don't know, we don't know. Specifically anti-Semitic incidents during recent times, there have been 7 reported anti-Semitic incidents. I've got the detail of those. It probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to go through those, because some of those are ongoing incidents. But things like harassment of individuals being targeted because of who they are, verbal and repeated verbal abuse towards individuals in a public space, be they property owners or members of the community. And kind of one-off engagements of a particularly unpleasant nature. So all of those are being taken incredibly seriously, as are the other matters. But these things happen, horrible things happen in Hertfordshire, as they do elsewhere in the world, but we are not seeing a significant increases in reporting, and we have a really sharp eye on trying to make sure that remains the case.
Thank you. That's reassuring and useful to know. There's been this month the introduction of a new conditional caution for hate crime. It was a pilot, I think, operating across 4 police force areas. It's now been expanded to another 18, including Hertfordshire. So appreciating it's kind of week 2 for it. How do you anticipate that might be used, or how it might impact how the constabulary responds to hate crime offences? officers.
Thank you. As you say, Hertfordshire has adopted this pilot, and it effectively gives us, the police, the powers to authorise the use of a conditional caution. So someone is held to account, fully documented, recordable on their record, but they don't need to go to court. So it's a quick way of hopefully someone reflecting, learning and stopping because of that sanction of that conditional caution. There are some criteria around it, that it can't be aggravated, it can't be repeated, some obvious controls around that. It's too early to say what the impact of this will be. I think it feels a really sensible thing to have in terms of an option for us to take forward, because we can more quickly provide justice, feedback to the victim and hold an offender to account. We will have scrutiny of this through our local hate crime supervisors. We've got officers who are specifically trained in this to make sure we're using it appropriately. We have a scrutiny panel of officers and external experts who make sure that when we have kind of out of court, which a conditional caution is, remedies for things like hate crime, that we're using it properly. So we'll have a really good independent lens to make sure we're using it properly. But and we've also talked to our neighbourhood teams and our investigative officers about this new option they've got. Too early to say, but I think it's a good option for it to have, and I hope it means more people will be held to account more quickly.
Thank you very much for that reassurance. It's useful. I'm going to move on then to our final agenda item, which is around violence fixated individuals. And again, without going into kind of individual cases, it's been a fair bit kind of reported nationally in recent times around kind of risk posed by individuals who aren't motivated by a particular ideology, but who have a perhaps fascination around violence. And I think still an area that's gaining understanding in places as well. So what's the Constabulary's current understanding of threat posed by individuals of that type in Hertfordshire?
Thank you. Well, we have a good understanding. I think it's the first point to make. So I know, and I'm not going to talk about specific case numbers here, Commissioner, I think for reasons I hope you and everybody listening would understand, but I know there are a small number of individuals, and my teams know them individually, who are being managed through things like the Channel programme and other specialist interventions because they are of high risk of causing harm. We know those individuals. Really importantly, we know there are a number of individuals who don't meet the thresholds to be managed in those specialist programmes, who are perhaps displaying risky behaviours, whatever they might be. Fixation, ideology, carrying of knives, whatever they might be. We know who they are as well. And there's a number of forums that exist in Hertfordshire. Integrated offender management forums, habitual knife carrying forums, children's groups, adult groups, where there's a safety net wrapped around those specialist national programmes to make sure that we understand people on the threshold of worry and people who are right at the upper end of worry. So I appreciate that was a slightly broad answer, but we have a good understanding.
Thank you. That's what I was hoping would be the case. And in areas where those individuals are falling outside some of those national programmes, can I just ask you to just drill in a bit more in terms of the approach with partners to reduce risk and put controls and interventions around those individuals? Yeah,
absolutely. So we work with mental health partners, children's social care, adult social care, health partners, mental health teams, probation, education, a huge range of partners where the sorts of individuals we're talking about normally have got chaotic lifestyles. So, for example, talking about children, we have a prevention and diversion team in the Constabulary who, through their normal work in communities, in troubled houses and in schools, specifically then identify children and go into partnership safeguarding meetings to say, how can we help this child reduce the risky behaviour, put them back on the right track? So there's a huge kind of mechanism behind that, and that's all tied together incredibly closely. And there are fixed multi-agency meetings that talk about those types of children displaying those worrying behaviours. It's exactly the same for adults, whatever that might be. because of the volume of their offending, because of, as I said earlier, the carriage of knives, because they're displaying worrying behaviours of some time. We come together with housing, health, education, mental health and others to put a bespoke package of care, intervention management around an individual to try and keep the public safe, quite often to keep that individual safe or those around them safe. So it's a huge amount of work. It's a huge amount of work if I'm candid with you, but clearly hugely important work to stop terrible things potentially happening.
Thank you. And where individuals do have an ideological motivation, they sit in some quite established processes, prevent and channel national schemes. What's your current assessment of how those processes are working in Hertfordshire? Are you satisfied with their current work?
Yeah, yes, is the one word answer. There has been narrative nationally around, some have expressed concern around the Prevent programme, which is the kind of top end national intervention for the most worrying, dangerous, troubled individuals, where individuals don't quite meet that threshold. What happens? I think, as I've alluded to, there's a really strong safety net beneath that in Hertfordshire that, having spoken to my teams who are expert in this area, reassure me that there is that. We refer in, and we know when we refer cases in when they are not adopted by a national programme. And then there's that pick up, well, okay, where are they going to be managed in Hertfordshire? Be that through just a normal agency lead, be that through one of those partnership forums I talked around. So you can never be complacent, and there is always the risk here. I think everyone would understand, of something you don't see, somebody you don't know, or someone where you just get that difficult risk assessment wrong. But there is a significant safety net of individuals who aren't managed by Prevent in Hertfordshire, and I think the public should be, and I hope you are reassured by that.
Thank you. That's useful. It's a topic that's kind of comes up nationally every so often, but fortunately, it hasn't been a Hertfordshire specific issue. But as you say, there's always that useful need to get assurance that things are being managed as effectively as they can, recognising some of the inherent risks and challenges in it. So that's useful to get an update on. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this morning's agenda. Thank you to members of the public for joining us. Be another 8 PM in mid-May. I hope you found the conversation this morning interesting. And Chief, thanks very much.